Philippians 2 verse 1 to 30 through the Bible. Chapter 2, Part 1. Theme: Pattern for Christian living, others. Mind of Christ, humble. Mind of God, exaltation of Christ. Mind of Paul, things of Christ. Mind of Timothy, like-minded with Paul. Mind of Epaphroditus, the work of Christ. In the first chapter, we saw the philosophy of Christian living summed up in one verse. For to me to live is Christ, and to die is gain. Christ was the very center of Paul's life. Now in this chapter, we come to the pattern for Christian living, which is the mind of Christ, as we shall see. It cannot be by imitation. I hear people talking today about following Jesus. I sometimes would like to ask these folk what they mean by that, especially when their lives do not conform to what they are saying. Are they trying to imitate Jesus? When Paul says here that Christ is the pattern for Christian living, he is not talking about imitation. He is talking about impartation. That is, the mind of Christ should be in us, and it can be there only by the power of the Spirit of God. I learned a long time ago that when Vernon McGee does things, they are not only not done well, they are done wrong, always. I am accused of being rather strong-willed, and I have a tendency to move ahead on my own volition. But when I do that, I stub my toe. Then I say, Lord, I'm ready now for you to take over. It has been wonderful to see how the Lord does take over. We need to learn to sit back and watch the Spirit of God move. That doesn't mean that we simply sit and twiddle our thumbs. Of course, we carry on the program that God has given us to carry on, but the power and the dynamic come from the Spirit of God. In this chapter is one of the greatest theological statements made in Scripture concerning the person of Christ. Down through the centuries, one of the most controversial issues has come out of that theological statement. In fact, it is the thing that probably divided Europe. It had more to do with it than anything else. The theory promoted was the kenosis theory, which is that at Christ's incarnation he emptied himself of his deity. This chapter will make it clear that he did not empty himself of his deity. The pattern for Christian living, others. Before we get into the controversial issue, let's notice the practical side. This is a practical epistle. If there be therefore any consolation in Christ, if any comfort of love, if any fellowship of the Spirit, if any bowels and mercies. Philippians 2 verse 1. The if, which begins this verse, is not the if of condition. This is not a conditional clause. You will find that many times Paul uses if as an argument rather than a condition. Paul is a logical thinker. It has been said that if you do not find Paul logical, you are not reading him aright. It would be more accurate to translate it. Since there is consolation in Christ, and since there is comfort of love, and since there is the fellowship of the Spirit, and since there are bowels, tenderness, and mercy. Now in view of all this, Paul says, Fulfill ye my joy, that ye be like-minded, having the same love, being of one accord, of one mind. Philippians 2 verse 2. Even though he is in prison, he is rejoicing in the Lord. But he says that he would rejoice even more if he knew the gospel was working in the lives of the Philippian believers. That ye be like-minded, having the same love, being of one accord, of one mind. You see, there had been a little difficulty, as we noted before, in the Philippian church, not much, but a little. Paul wants them to be of one mind. He is not asking them to be carbon copies of each other. In most churches, there are two groups of people, one group for the pastor and one group against the pastor. The folk that comprise these groups are not thinking for themselves, but are carbon copies of the group leaders. To be of one mind is to let the mind of Christ be in you. That permits differences of expressions, differences in gifts, differences in methods of service, even differences in minor doctrines. We won't be beating each other on the head because we disagree on these things. If we have the mind of Christ, we will agree on the major tenets of the faith. Let nothing be done through strife or vainglory, but in lowliness of mind, let each esteem other better than themselves. Philippians 2 verse 3. You remember that Paul has mentioned this before. He said that there were some people who were preaching Christ out of envy and strife. Now he says, let nothing be done through strife or vainglory. I would say most of the difficulties in the church today are not due to doctrinal differences. They are due to strife and envy. Some people just naturally cause trouble. If we could follow this injunction, let nothing be done through strife or vainglory, I think it would solve 90% or maybe even 100% of the problems in churches today. If you are doing something through strife in the church, you had better not do it at all. The same is true if you do things because you expect to be recognized. One of the reasons I don't like to go to organizational meetings is that I get tired of people having to thank Mrs. So-and-so because she brought a bouquet of petunias, or Mr. So-and-so because he brought in an extra chair, and you don't dare leave out anyone because if you do, you will be in trouble. Do Christians need to be recognized and complimented and commended for things they do? Let nothing be done through strife or vainglory, trying to make a name for yourself. But in lowliness of mind, let each esteem other better than themselves. Perhaps this was the problem between Euodias and Syntyche. It may be that each felt she was being put down by the other. If this verse were obeyed, I believe it would solve the problems in most of the music departments in our churches. It would eliminate this attitude. Why don't they call on me to sing? I have a much better voice than so-and-so. The same could be said for problems on boards and on committees. It would eliminate the power struggle that goes on in some churches among the church officers. Look not every man on his own things, but every man also on the things of others. Philippians 2 verse 4. Others. That is an important word. I was absolutely overwhelmed to get a letter from another broadcaster with a gift for our broadcast enclosed. It came from a man whose broadcast is carried on one of the same stations as our broadcast in the state of Florida. He wrote, "What a blessing your broadcast is. I don't know anything about this man's broadcast, but I can tell you something about his person. He was exhibiting the mind of Christ. He was carrying out the admonition of this verse. Look not every man on his own things, but every man also on the things of others." His letter was a very humbling experience for me. Others is the key to this passage. It is the Christian faith which first made that word others important. Why did Christ come from heaven's glory to this earth? It was for others. Why should we carry the gospel? For others. To think of others rather than ourselves is having the mind of Christ.